The city of Valoria was once the heart of a great empire. Its towers touched the clouds, and its streets were filled with songs, bright lights, and smiling faces. People believed the world would never change, but now the streets were silent.
Ow.
Smoke rose through the broken roofs, and the sound of fire cracked through the air. The Golden City had become a shadow of its past. Queen Eleanor stood on her high balcony and looked over the city. Her long silver hair blew in the wind. She was not a young queen, but her eyes were sharp and calm. Behind her, the room was full of voices. Soldiers shouted reports, messengers ran in and out, and the sound of heavy boots echoed on the marble floor. Yet the queen did not move. She watched the flames swallow the lower streets. Once Valoria had been blessed with peace and power. It had the strongest armies and the most learned scholars. The people trusted her rule. But now the enemies were no longer outside the walls. They were within. The Queen's Council had divided, and greedy hands had opened secret doors for war to enter. The traitors had brought down all that her ancestors had built. In the Great Hall, the nobles argued. Some wanted to flee, others wanted to surrender. The Queen remained quiet, her face calm but her heart heavy. She had trusted too many false men. She had believed loyalty could be bought with titles and gold. Above the sounds of fear and shouting, the Queen's advisor came close and spoke softly. "Your Majesty, the lower gates have fallen. We must retreat to the inner palace. The rebels are closing in." Eleanor did not answer right away. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she turned to him. "Is the princess safe?" "We sent her with the guard, Your Majesty," the man said. "They are taking her through the old tunnels under the city. Captain Hale is with her." The Queen gave a slow nod. She did not know Captain Hale well. He was a soldier from the frontier, a man who rose through battle rather than birth. He was brave, they said, but he was no noble. Still, he had sworn to protect her daughter, and that was enough. Far below the burning towers, Princess Clara ran through the dark tunnels. The air was thick with dust and smoke. The torches burned low as the guards led her deeper underground. She was frightened, but did not show it. Her hands were shaking, but she held herself tall, just like her mother had taught her. Beside her walked Captain Jack Hale. His clothes were torn, his face covered in grime, yet his eyes were alert. He carried a pulse rifle across his back and a small wound on his arm. Still, every movement of his body was strong and sure. "Keep close, Your Highness," he said. His voice was calm, steady, like a wall in the storm. Clara looked at him for a moment. "Will we make it out, Captain?" He smiled a little. "As long as I breathe, yes." Something warm stirred in her chest. He spoke without fear, and somehow she believed him. Behind them, an explosion shook the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the guards coughed, then shouted, "They've found the lower passage." Jack grabbed Clara's arm. "Run!" They ran through narrow corridors as the roar of battle echoed behind them. The guards tried to hold off the attackers, but one by one, their voices faded. Jack pushed open a heavy door at the end of the tunnel and led Clara through. They emerged into an abandoned workshop filled with old vehicles and stale air. Clara turned to him, out of breath. "We cannot leave them behind." Jack's voice was low, almost gentle. "Sometimes the hardest part of survival is letting others buy time for you." Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded. She watched as he sealed the door behind them. Above them, the city still burned. The Queen was still standing by her window, fighting back despair. For years, she had believed that noble blood and ancient names gave strength to a nation. Now, the fate of that nation rested in the hands of one soldier, a man born from nothing, leading her daughter through the dark. Lenore whispered to herself, "Let him live. Let them both live." The wind carried her words away. Far below, Jack and Clara climbed into a small transport vehicle. The engine whined weakly, then roared to life. They sped through the lower tunnels, toward the distant hills where the last loyal troops were said to be gathering. The princess looked back one last time at the faint glow of the burning city behind them. Her home, her childhood, her world all lost in a single night. But beside her sat a man who seemed unbreakable. His eyes were on the road ahead, calm and full of purpose. And for the first time since the war began, Princess Clara felt something stronger than fear. She felt hope. The old tunnels opened far from the city walls. near the quiet hills beyond the smoke. The morning light fell weak and gray across the fields. Princess Clara and Captain Jack Hale stopped beside a stream where the water ran cold and clear. Both were tired, but they did not rest long. The city behind them still burned, and they knew soldiers might come after them at any moment. Jack checked the horizon. His uniform was torn, and his face was black with soot, but his eyes were steady. "We need to keep going," he said. "There is an old defense post about 10 miles from here. If we reach it before sunset, we can call for help." Clara sat on a stone and tried to catch her breath. "Do you think my mother is safe?" she asked softly. Jack looked at her. "The Queen has survived worse. She will find a way." He did not say what he truly feared, that the palace might already have fallen. He had learned long ago that hope could push people farther than truth ever could. They started walking again. The land around them was quiet, the air heavy with smoke and the smell of metal. Once they passed a broken convoy, wagons turned to ash, and the pale bodies of fallen soldiers lying still under the open sky. Clara stopped and covered her mouth, eyes wide in horror. Jack gently led her away. "This is what happens when greed rules," he said. "Your people loved the Queen because she gave them peace. The ones who started this war loved only power." Clara looked at him with tears in her eyes. "How do you still believe in anything after this?" He smiled a little. "Because I've seen people stand when everything falls. Fight for them." As they walked, Clara started to watch the way he moved. He walked with quiet confidence, every step measured, every glance alert. He did not carry himself like a nobleman or a leader. Yet there was something about him that made her feel safe, as if he could face any storm. By early afternoon, they reached a valley where an old watchtower stood, rough and broken from years of neglect. Jack climbed the steps and looked out across the plains. "No smoke," he said. "That's good. We might get a few hours here." Clara sat beneath the tower. Her feet were sore, her gown torn, and dust covered her face. Still, she felt lighter than she had in days. Here, away from the noise of the palace, she could breathe. She looked up at the quiet sky. It was hard to believe that a day ago she was sitting beside her mother in the grand hall, listening to nobles promise peace and safety. All of that had vanished. Jack began to check the equipment in the room above. There was an old radio unit, broken, but still glowing with faint power. He worked on it for a long time, cleaning the wires and twisting a few loose parts until the screen flickered. When a small green light turned on, Clara gasped. "You did it!" She said, "Can we call my mother?" Jack shook his head. "Signal is too weak. Maybe if I climb the ridge later, I can try again." Clara looked at him with new respect. "You seem to know how to fix everything." He laughed softly. "In the army, we fix what we broke ourselves. No one else will do it for us." They shared a quiet meal from Jack's field pack. A few pieces of dry bread and a canteen of water. The sun began to sink behind the hills, painting the valley in orange light. For a moment, the world looked peaceful again. Clara leaned back against the stone wall. "You were not born in the city, were you?" Jack shook his head. "No, I grew up near the borderlands. My family worked the mines. Hard life. When I turned 18, I joined the army to see the world. Never thought I'd end up guarding a princess." She smiled. "You regret it?" He looked at her, eyes calm and sure. "No, not for a second." A pause hung between them, quiet and full of something new. Clara felt her heart beat faster, though she did not know why. Suddenly, a distant noise broke the stillness. Jack stood at once, hand on his rifle. "Engines," he whispered. "Too close." He moved to the window and saw dust rising far beyond the ridge. 3 armored vehicles moved slowly through the valley, searching. He cursed under his breath and turned to Clara. "They found our trail. What do we do?" she asked. "We move." Now, they rushed down the steps and into the cover of trees behind the tower. Jack cut through the brush, leading Clara toward a narrow creek that ran north. The water was shallow, but enough to hide their tracks. For hours they walked through mud and stones until the sounds of engines faded away behind them. When they finally stopped, night had fallen. Jack built a small fire between the rocks, the faint glow hidden behind thick branches. Clara sat close to the flame, her body trembling with fatigue. He gave her his coat without a word. She looked at him through the firelight. You could have left me behind. Others would have. Jack's eyes met hers, steady and kind. I don't leave people behind, he said. Not my way. Clara smiled faintly, feeling a warmth not only from the fire, but from something deeper. Outside, the wind carried the far-off echoes of battle, but in that small place by the creek, the world felt still. And for the first time since the fall of the city, both the princess and the soldier felt that maybe, just maybe, the dawn would come again. Dawn rose slowly over the valley, spreading a faint gold light across the hills. The night had been quiet, but Jack did not sleep, kept watch beside the small fire, listening to every sound in the dark. The world was broken now, and trust was a rare thing. When the first light touched the trees, he stood and stretched his sore limbs. Princess Clara opened her eyes, still wrapped in his coat. Her hair was tangled, her gown covered with dust, but her face was calm. Morning already? She asked softly. Jack nodded. Need to move before they return. If we can reach the mountains by noon, we might find what's left of the signal base. She stood, rubbing her tired arms. You have a plan for everything. He smiled a little. Plans keep people alive. They began their climb across the uneven ground. The hills were quiet, except for birds calling in the distance. The air smelled of grass and smoke. Each step was heavy, but Clara kept up. She refused to slow him down, even when her legs ached. By midday, they reached the edge of an old defense post hidden beneath the ridge. It was half destroyed, the roof caved in, and walls broken by fire. But in the center stood a tower that still hummed faintly with power. Jack examined the old control panel inside. It still has juice, he said, pressing a few buttons. The screen flickered and showed a weak signal. If we can boost it, maybe we can send a message to the Royal Army. Clara stepped close, watching with hope. If they hear us, they can come for us. He nodded, focused. That's the idea. He worked for an hour, fixing cables and cleaning dust from the circuits. Clara helped as best she could, handing him tools and holding the flashlight steady. When the final connection clicked into place, the tower gave a low hum, and a new light flashed green. Jack smiled. It's working. He leaned toward the speaker. This is Captain Jack Hale, calling any loyal forces of Valoria. The princess is alive. Repeat, the princess is alive.
Ooh.
We are safe for now in the northern ridges. The radio crackled, silent for a moment. Then, through the static, a faint voice answered, This is Commander Lewis. We read you, Captain. The Queen is alive. She is gathering forces at High Spire Fortress. Hold your position until we reach you. Clara gasped and covered her mouth. My mother is alive. Jack gave a small smile. Told you she would be. For a moment, relief filled the air. Clara looked up at the rising sky, tears in her eyes. After 2 endless nights, there was light again. But the moment did not last. The radio hissed, the signal breaking, and the voice on the other end shouted a warning, then only static. Jack's smile vanished. They're jamming the frequency, he said sharply. Someone traced the broadcast. Clara's hope shifted to fear. The rebels? Jack nodded grimly. Most likely. We have to move. Now, they ran from the tower just as the sound of distant engines rumbled through the valley again, this time closer. Clara's heart raced. She stumbled, but Jack caught her and pulled her along. They reached a small ridge, sliding down the rocks until they reached a hidden path below. For hours, they moved through forests, ducking under branches and crossing streams. The noise of pursuit followed behind but slowly faded. When they finally stopped, both were trembling with exhaustion. They sat on the ground under a large oak tree. Jack breathed hard, his uniform soaked with sweat. Clara leaned against the trunk beside him, her chest rising and falling quickly. Do you ever think about giving up? She asked quietly. Jack looked at her, his face serious but kind. Never. My father used to say, as long as a person can stand. There's a way forward. He looked at her hands, scratched and tired but still strong. You haven't given up either. I can't, she said. Not when my people still believe in us. The wind blew softly through the trees. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Then Clara spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Before the war, I lived in the palace and thought strength came from crowns and gold walls. But now I see it as something else. Jack kept his gaze on the road ahead. What do you think it is? She smiled faintly. It's the will to protect someone other than yourself. He met her eyes, and for a second the world felt still. The battle, the fear, the ruins all faded. Only the two of them remained. Later, as night settled, they built another small fire in a hollow cave. The flames warmed the air around them. Jack checked his weapon, then leaned back. Commander Lewis said, "The Queen is gathering her army at High Spire," he said. "We head north fast enough. We can join them." Clara looked at the fire. "You could go without me. It would be safer." He shook his head. "I gave my word. I'll see you safe to your mother." "But why?" Her voice was quiet but filled with wonder. "Could run. Save yourself. You owe me nothing." Jack's reply was simple, "'Cause it's right." The flames flickered between them, lighting their faces in golden shadow. Clara wanted to answer, but couldn't find the words. She just watched him, this soldier who had walked through fire without fear. And somewhere deep inside her heart, something began to change. It was not just gratitude anymore. It was something warmer, unseen, yet stronger than fear or duty. Outside, the night stretched wide and silent. But in that small space beside the fire, two lives stood on the edge of something greater than war. The morning came quietly after a long, cold night. Thin mist floated across the valley, and the sun rose behind the mountains. Jack woke first, as he always did, listening for danger before he moved. The forest was peaceful. No engine sounds, no gunfire, only birds calling through the trees. He turned to look at Clara. She was still asleep, her head resting on her arm. Her face looked young and calm, no longer the frightened princess from the burning city. He watched her for a moment, then looked away and began to pack their few things. When she awoke, the smell of smoke and warm air filled the cave. "Good morning," she said in a low voice. He smiled. "Good morning. You should eat and move. Spire's still far." They shared a small breakfast from the last of Jack's supplies. The food was dry, but gave them strength. Then they started walking north again, moving through hills and rivers. The land grew rougher the higher they climbed. Patches of snow covered the rocks, and every breath showed white in the air. But it also meant they were close. The fortress called High Spire stood high in the mountains, built of stone and steel, said to be strong enough to survive any attack. Clara kept her eyes forward. Every mile they walked, her hope grew stronger. If her mother had truly survived, they might see her within a day. By afternoon, they reached a ridge that gave a view of the valley below. Smoke still rose far away where battles burned. Clara stopped and looked out silently. "So much lost," she said. Jack stood beside her. "Yes, but not everything. As long as people fight to protect instead of destroy, there is still something worth saving." She turned to him. "And you really believe one man can change things?" He nodded slowly. "One person can light the fire that reminds others they can stand too." They continued climbing until the trees thinned, replaced by bare stone and freezing wind. The path grew steep. Jack helped Clara across loose rocks and narrow ledges. When the sky began to darken, snow started to fall. Small flakes landed on Clara's hair and melted as they touched her skin. "We need shelter," Jack said. "We'll freeze out here." They found an old watch station built into the cliff, half buried in snow. It was small but strong enough to block the wind. Jack lit a small fire from dry wood found inside. The warmth spread slowly. Clara sat beside it, shivering, teeth trembling. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You'll freeze," she said softly. "I've seen worse cold," he replied with a faint smile. The firelight flickered on their faces. Clara looked into the flames and spoke quietly. "I never thanked you, Jack, not only for saving me, but for being here every step." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You've been braver than most soldiers I know." They sat in silence, the quiet broken only by the wind outside. Then Clara asked, "What will you do after the war?" He looked into the fire. "I don't think that far ahead. First, peace must return. Then, maybe I'll find a place where the world feels calm again." "Would you ever return to the city?" she asked. He shook his head. "I have no place there. The city belongs to people like you." Clara moved closer, her eyes steady. "The city needs people like you more than ever." Their eyes met, and something deep passed between them. The fire burned low, and the world outside faded behind falling snow. In that small room carved into stone, two hearts began to understand what words could not explain. Hours later, they left the watchpost. Storm had eased, leaving a pale morning sky. The mountains stretched high before them, and beyond those peaks waited the fortress of Highspire. As they reached the last ridge, the loud sound of engines broke the quiet. Jack stopped, signaling Clara to stay low. Through the snow, three dark figures marched across the mountain path. Rebel soldiers. They spotted movement and shouted. Bullets struck the rocks around them. Jack pulled Clara behind a ledge. "Stay down," he shouted. He aimed his rifle and returned fire, hitting one of the rebels. The others fired back wildly, their shots echoing through the cliffs. Clara grabbed his arm. "There are too many. Then we make them believe there are more of us," he said firmly. He fired again, moving fast, switching positions. The sound confused their enemies, and they hesitated. Jack took that moment to throw a smoke charge down the slope. It exploded with a thick gray cloud. He grabbed Clara's hand. "Now, run." They sprinted through the smoke, stumbling across stones as bullets whizzed past. Jack kept himself between her and the danger until they cleared the ridge. The rebels' voices faded behind them as they followed the narrow trail leading to the fortress towers, now visible through the mist. When they reached the outer gates of Highspire, exhausted and breathless, loyal guards ran forward to meet them. One of them recognized Clara and fell to his knees. "Your Highness, you're alive." Clara turned to Jack. His face was dirty, his arm bleeding slightly from a scrape, but he smiled in relief. "We made it," he said softly. She looked at him with full eyes, her heart full of gratitude and feelings she could not name. Behind them, the strong walls of the fortress gleamed in the fading light, a promise of safety after endless fear. And though the war still raged beyond the mountains, something inside Clara's heart had already found peace. Not in crowns or power, but in the bravery of one man who refused to give up on her or the world. The great fortress of Highspire stood like a mountain of stone against the rising sun. Its tall towers were marked with the scars of war, but still strong and proud. The gates opened slowly as Princess Clara and Captain Jack Hale entered, walking side by side through a crowd of soldiers and workers who stopped to stare. Whispers followed them at every step. Many had believed the princess lost, maybe even dead. Now here she was alive, walking into the light with a worn soldier at her side. Clara's gown was torn, her face pale from sleepless nights, yet her eyes shone with quiet strength. Jack walked beside her with a limp from the wound on his leg, but his posture remained straight. The Queen's captain of the guard rode forward to meet them. "Your Highness," he said, bowing deeply. "The Queen awaits you in the throne hall." Clara looked at Jack. He nodded slightly. And together, they followed the captain through long corridors, lined with battle flags. The halls smelled of metal and smoke, and the air carried the sound of distant drills. At every corner, soldiers stopped to salute them. Jack looked uneasy under their gaze. He was not born for castles and titles, and this world of marble and crown symbols felt heavier than the battlefield. At last they reached the tall door of the throne hall. Two guards opened it slowly, and Clara stepped inside first. The wide hall was filled with nobles, officers, and servants. The Queen sat on the high marble throne, a golden crown resting lightly on her head. Though she looked tired, her presence filled the room with quiet power. When her eyes met Clara's, the careful mask of a ruler broke into a mother's face. She rose quickly and walked down the steps. Clara ran forward and fell into her arms. For a long time, Queen Eleanor held her daughter close, whispering words no one else could hear. The court watched in silence. Some smiled, others bowed their heads. Finally, the Queen pulled away, brushing tears from Clara's cheeks. Her gaze then moved to the man standing quietly beside her daughter. Jack bowed low, one knee touching the floor. "Your Majesty," he said, "the princess is safe." "I am honored to have served." Eleanor studied him for a moment. His armor was dented, his hands rough, his face darkened by wind and battle. He had the look of a man who had walked through fire and kept walking. She remembered hearing his name again and again, in reports the soldier who united scattered troops. The man called the Iron Star by the people. Now he stood before her, not proud, but humble. The The queen's voice was steady. "You brought back my child when an army could not. You have my thanks, Captain Hale." He rose slowly. "It was my duty, Your Majesty." She gave a small smile. "Duty can make men fight, but only courage makes them protect. Tell me, Captain, what kept you going when all hope was gone?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Hope itself," he said quietly, "and the belief that no life is too small to save." Something in his words touched the queen's heart, but around them the nobles murmured softly. Some looked displeased. A few sneered at the sight of a common soldier standing beside royalty. That night, the queen held a celebration for the return of her daughter and the survival of the fortress. Music filled the grand hall and torches burned bright. Generals toasted victories, nobles whispered new plans, and the flag of Valoria waved again above the towers. Yet through all the noise, Clara's eyes kept finding Jack across the room. He stood alone near a tall window, looking out into the dark mountains. When she joined him, he turned with a small smile. "You should be celebrating," he said. "I am," she replied softly. "You're here." He looked at her gently, unsure of how to answer. "Your world and mine are not the same," he said. "When peace returns, you'll go back to your palace life. I'll return to the lines." Then Clara took his hand. "You think walls of gold and rules of rank will change what I feel?" He did not speak. For the first time, words were not enough. She leaned closer, the light of the torches soft against her face. "You gave me more than safety, Jack. You taught me what strength really is." The queen saw them from across the hall. Her eyes narrowed in thought. Later, when Jack turned to leave the room, she called out, "Captain Hale." The hall fell silent. He turned back and bowed. The queen stepped forward slowly, the crown gleaming in the firelight. "Tell me," she said, her voice carrying through the hall, "who is this man that my daughter cannot look away from?" Clara, standing proud beside him, met her mother's gaze and smiled. "My husband," she said clearly, her voice steady as the mountain air. Gasps filled the hall. Nobles whispered in shock, some angry, some amazed. Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding, his eyes fixed on the queen. For one long breath, time itself seemed to stop. The queen looked between them, her expression unreadable. Then slowly, she smiled a quiet, knowing smile that broke the tension in the air. "Then so be it," she said at last. "Let the world remember that the crown stands not for blood alone, but for the strength of every heart that dares to love fiercely." Cheers rose from the soldiers around them. The queen placed her hand on Jack's shoulder. "You came into my life as a soldier, Captain Hale. Now you shall stay as my son." The music began again, stronger and brighter. The torches blazed higher. Outside, dawn touched the sky with golden fire as Valoria began to heal. And in that moment, the queen's words echoed through the halls of history, reminding all who heard them that true power is not found in titles, crowns, or armies, but in courage, humanity, and love that stands unbroken, even in the darkest times.